Hi, I'm Katie, farmer florist, and today I'm going to tell you how to compost with worms. This is called vermicomposting. I've been doing this method of composting for about 5 years, and unlike thermal composting, composting with worms is a lot easier and a bit more hands-off. So I think you'll find it just as rewarding as I do, and I'm excited to share it with you today. Alrighty, let's find some wormies. Here they are. So these are red wiggler worms. That's the kind you want to get for your composting. And these red wiggler worms will take your food scraps and turn it into this amazing, nutrient-dense, rich compost. Essentially, this compost is all worm poop. They call it worm castings. And this is essentially referred to as black gold. Farmers love this stuff because of the amazing properties it holds for plants. Here I'm going to show you how to do this composting method on a small farm scale or a large garden scale. You can compost outside here, right on the ground, in a big mound. So step one to begin your worm compost pile is to lay down a nice bedding material for them. And here I'm going to use some old straw that I have on hand. You can also use leaf litter. It's really nice to start your compost pile in the fall because the leaves are very readily available. So to begin, you're just putting down a nice layer of bedding material for the wormies. And then what you want to do is moisten it a little bit. Worms need moisture. They don't want to dry out, otherwise they can't do their job. And so to get your red wiggler worms, you can look online for local sources near you, or you can ask around and find another farmer who may have a compost pile and can share some of these red wiggler worms with you. But regardless, they will come probably in a little package with some compost around them. And so when you get them, you'll take them and simply sprinkle them on your bedding material. Alright, so after you add your worms to the bedding material, you want to give them a light layer of scraps on top. And eggshells are amazing. They can get through them better if they're crushed. So good things to add to your worm pile would be any kind of vegetable or fruit scraps. You don't necessarily want to do meats or cheeses. Some bread is okay, but it's better to be heavier on the vegetative material. Coffee grounds are amazing. Worms love coffee and tea as well. In this step, you don't want to overload them because you want your worms to be able to work through the material first before adding more. If you overload them, they kind of get suffocated and it's too much for them to go through. But after you have your light layer, we're going to do another layer of mulch on top, and your goal is to cover all of the food scraps that you have and not leave any showing. And again, you can use your leaves. You don't have to do straw like I'm doing. And you want to moisten this as well. It's really important to keep your worm pile moist because the worms do need that moisture in their bodies to be alive. You don't want to overwater the worm pile because overwatering can lead to the worms drowning. And how you know if you're overwatering is that you shall see water seeping out the bottom, and sometimes you'll see the worms trying to crawl away and out of your pile. that's a really good indication that you're overwatering. And if you're underwatering your pile, you'll be able to tell because everything will feel a little bit dry inside. So you definitely want to go for that nice in the middle, moist consistency. And I'd encourage you to continue checking on your pile to feel out the nice middle ground of the moisture. For maintaining your pile like this and continuing to add the scraps, it is first and foremost important that you allow your worms the time to consume the scraps that you have just added. So you want to wait at least a week or so, and if they've gone through their scraps, then it will be okay to add some new scraps. And to add new scraps, you simply pull back on the mulch material and add more of your food and then cover it up again. Unlike thermal composting, you don't have to worry too much about the nitrogen-carbon ratio, the nitrogen being all your vegetable and fruit scraps and the carbon being the straw and the leaves that you'll use. If you're doing thermal composting, you have to really worry about that ratio of layering, and then you also have to do a lot of turning to get the heat going in the pile. But with vermicomposting, you don't have to worry about that ratio. It's simply moving back mulch, adding scraps, and there is no turning involved. For your pile, you want to not let it exceed about 3 feet. If it does exceed 3 feet, then it can start heating up. And you don't want your pile to heat up because then it'll cook the worms. So you want to keep your pile low to begin with, and it's better to kind of spread out rather than build up when you're doing vermicomposting. So to not overwhelm your worms with too much of your scrap material, it is important to section off your compost pile, and that means you'll be adding your compost, your food scraps, to different areas of your pile at each time. So in my round pile, I have it sectioned off into 4 quadrants essentially, and I'll fill up about a 10-gallon pail of scraps every week or two. And I'll take that 10-gallon pail and I'll dump it into maybe quadrant 1, and then the next couple weeks I'll dump it into quadrant 2, and I rotate it around so that by the time I'm coming back around to the first quadrant, the worms have already had several weeks to process what I gave them and they're ready for more. Alright, so I'm going to add my scraps to this section that I have right now. And I just move back all this mulch material. And so I fill up this 10-gallon pail with my scraps. In my kitchen I have a smaller pail, and I'll continue to add to this bin until it's pretty full like this. And since I farm flowers, I have a lot of cut flower material usually. And so I just want to create kind of an even layer with this here. And then I'll take the mulch and I'll cover it all back up. Next time I go to add some material, I'll come over to this section and I'll add it. And I'll keep working my way around the pile. Happy worms! So when we were outside, I showed you my compost pile, which was a circle, and I had it separated in about 4 quadrants. But you don't have to do a circle at your space. If it is more conducive for you, you can do a long pile and section it off like this, really in as many sections as you want. And then you can add here, add here, add here, add here, and rotate it through. And then for watering, you can either overhead water your pile, or you can lay irrigation lines running down the center that have misters on them. And you can even set these on a timer for it to mist water onto your worm compost pile and keep it moist. So then in terms of harvesting, when you've stopped adding to a section over a period of time, you'll want to come to it and move all of the material back, exposing the worm castings. And then you'll want to walk away for a little bit and actually allow this to dry out. And what that'll do is it'll send the worms down and out traveling into the quadrants where there are food, because worms don't want to be dry. So if you allow this to dry out and allow your worms to migrate out of the way, you can come and scrape off the top material and use this for your plants. And now this is a section that I haven't added to in a little while because I plan to harvest it soon. So there is not a lot of worm activity here going on, but this is all really good, rich worm castings that I can add to my plants now and give them the edge to grow really strong and healthy. All right, so to recap, when starting your vermicomposting pile outdoors, it is important to start with a nice bedding material. You can use straw mulch or leaves and get that a little damp before adding your worms, which you should get in the mail or from another local grower. You'll want to look for the red wiggler worms. You'll add your worms and then you'll put on a light layer of food material. Any kind of vegetables are fine, and fruits. Even coffee, eggshells, tea, but steer away from any kind of meats, oils, fats, things like that. After you add your scrap material, you'll put another layer of mulch on top, and then you'll keep it moist. Worms want moisture. You won't overwater it because then your worms will want to escape, but just keep it damp enough and keep checking your pile to make sure the moisture is right. You'll want to keep your pile under 3 feet, otherwise it'll heat up and cook your worms, and you don't want that to happen. So keep your pile shallow. It's better to kind of spread out if you feel like you need to add more material and it's just getting too high. Just start spreading out. And use your quadrants. So add food to a different section of your pile every week or two, however often you add your scraps. And that way your worms won't get overloaded with material and they'll be able to go through everything. And then when harvesting your worm castings, simply stop adding to the section for several weeks. Pull back the top layer of mulch and allow that actually top layer to dry out a little bit. So leave it to dry out and the worms will migrate down and out into where there's food, and you can scrape off the castings from the top. And so your plants will thank you for this amazing richness of black gold that is worm castings. And yeah, I wish you all the best. Happy vermicomposting!